Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Recaps and Reacts with me, Sarah, where I just talk about shows, movies that I love, and I recap them and I talk about my reactions. And right now we are covering Bridgerton. So today we're going to talk about season 4, episode 3, Benedict and Sophie season. So let's just jump right on into it. Actually, I always forget before we jump into it, please like, comment, share, subscribe, leave a comment in the chat. We can discuss what are your thoughts about the season so far. I'm only on episode 3. I have not watched the second half yet because like I said, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and watch as I go. I have seen the first half, the first 4 episodes, but I have not seen the back half of the last 4 episodes. So I've only seen episodes 1 through 4. So yeah, so anyway, let's get into episode 3. So the scene opens with Sophie and Benedict leaving Cavender's countryside house. You remember last episode, Sophie got fired from the Cavender house and now she's unemployed. So Benedict is offering to help her find another job. However, when they're riding down the road, they're riding in silence. Benedict is wincing in pain. Sophie looks upset. Benedict asks for Sophie's name. She doesn't want to give it to him, but ultimately she ends up giving him her name. They begin talking, and Sophie says it's going to rain, and Benedict says, no, it's not. And the moment he says that, a drop comes down, and Sophie's like, so what is that? And he's like, it's mist. And then another drop comes down and he's like, it's a lot of mist. And then it just is a torrential downpour. Benedict says they can't go any further and that he has a cottage nearby. So when they go to the cottage, Sophie first thinks it's the stables and she's like, is this it? And Benedict's like, no, it's the stables. It's a little bit further down. And the cottage is a whole mansion. Benedict knocks on the door, no one's there, and she's like, you don't have a key to your own place? And he said, well, someone's always there. I want you to know that Benedict's privilege is coming out in this episode, just how rich he is. He doesn't really understand how easy he has it. But Benedict is looking around the property, for the key, kind of like underneath a rock or something, and you just see him looking for a key. All of a sudden the door opens and it's Sophie inside the house who opened the door for Benedict. And Benedict is like, how did you do that? And she's like, I just climbed through the window. She says maids are very resourceful. So once they're inside the house, Sophie starts doing like maid work, housework, because there is no one in the house. There's no staff in the house. And Benedict says, no, you are my guest. Do not do anything. Benedict puts her in a guest room and then tells her that she can wear whatever she wants. So he opens up this wardrobe and it's nothing but dresses. And Sophie's like, I didn't know there was a lady of the house. And Benedict says, there's not, it's all my sisters. And she says, she can't wear those. And he said, they won't mind, I assure you, these are old dresses. Benedict starts to wince in pain and Sophie offers to look at his side and he says, he's fine. He'll be fine. And then he bids her adieu. He goes off to his bedroom and Sophie stays in the new guest room. You can tell that Sophie's very excited about it. When Benedict gets to his room, he's kind of stumbling a little bit. He looks kind of out of it, or maybe he's just in so much pain, but he takes off his coat and you see that he has blood through his shirt. And then he takes off his shirt and there is a big cut. Now, if we want to rewind back, let's think back to when he was at Cavender's house when he was defending Sophie and he got in a fight with Cavender. Cavender had like a bottle in his hand. I think it broke, and when he was tussling with Benedict, he accidentally, I don't think it was intentional because Cavender was drunk, but he cut Benedict on his side with that bottle. So that's where the wound comes from. Sophie, in the middle of the night, is woken up by groans. She goes to Benedict's room and she knocks on the door. He doesn't really answer. I think he's sleeping. She opens the door and Benedict is writhing in pain. She sees that he was cut and she starts to dress his wound. She's putting, ointment on it and all of that. And I'm not sure if Benedict is having hallucinations, if he's dreaming. I'm not sure if he's lucid, but he tells Sophie to kiss him because he has visions of the lady in silver with the masquerade, with the mask on. So I don't know if he recognizes her mouth when he's in this pain. So he says to kiss him. Obviously, Sophie does not. And then he says, "Don't ever leave me again." Still not sure if this man is coherent or lucid. I'm not sure if he's dreaming, not sure, but he has another vision. And then he tells Sophie to kiss him again. She doesn't do that. And then he falls asleep. Sophie sits in the chair next to him, and then she ends up falling asleep too. So the next scene cuts to back in Mayfair. It's the Lady Whistledown narration. Julie Andrews is narrating because, she's the voice of Lady Whistledown. And she's talking about the firing of Sophie has left the Penwood house disorganized and disarray. And also Sophie did so much that 4 maids were needed to replace her. So because there's already a shortage in Mayfair of, I guess, the help, Lady Penwood starts snatching, poaching other staff from other homes, leaving the ton in disarray as well. Some people, oh my gosh, have to ask the scullery maid to help with the hairstyles, which isn't really turning out that great. Back at Benedict's cottage, there's an older couple in Benedict's room watching a sleeping Benedict and Sophie. I believe one of them clears their throats and Benedict and Sophie kind of jump up, and Benedict says, "Mr. and Mrs. Crabtree." And Mrs. Crabtree hurries to Benedict because she sees the wound, sees the bandage, and she's kind of fussing over him. Sophie says, "I assure you he's on the mend." Mrs. Crabtree says there's an unchaperoned lady in the room. And after an awkward silence, Benedict asks Sophie, or excuses Sophie and Mr. Crabtree. Mr. Crabtree and Sophie are having a conversation outside in the hallway. Mrs. Crabtree and Benedict are having a conversation that's kind of in the background. In this scene, we're kind of focused on Mr. Crabtree and Sophie, while Benedict is telling Mrs. Crabtree the events of the previous night and why they're there. Mr. Crabtree outside tells Sophie that they were visiting their daughter and they got caught in the downpour, the night before. And had they known Mr. Bridgerton was going to be there, they definitely would have been there. We cut back to the room, Benedict's room, with Mrs. Crabtree. And Mrs. Crabtree now has empathy for Sophie. And Benedict tells her that Sophie came to his aid last night. Because she came to his aid last night, they must treat her as his guest, and Mrs. Crabtree agrees. Back at Bridgerton House, we go to the Bridgerton House this episode, and Violet's talking to Mrs. Wilson, who I believe is the head of staff of the Bridgerton household. Violet asks Miss Wilson if she's happy there, and Miss Wilson says, "I assure you, ma'am, I'm very happy." Violet's relieved, and she was like, all of this maid wars is kind of getting to her. Mrs. Wilson said this is her household, and if there are any rumblings, she will handle it. And with that, Violet's happy. She goes and starts talking to her daughters. Eloise, Hyacinth, and Francesca are there. Violet asks Francesca if Lord Kilmartin and her would like to take the carriage to the garden party that it will be tomorrow. Francesca says no because they're actually meeting up with Penelope and Colin. Francesca hurriedly tells Eloise, "So I hope I didn't offend you that we didn't invite you." And Eloise says, "Oh no, I'm sure you're going to be talking about married things." But then she makes a funny little joke, a little dig at her mother and says, "But, I'll probably be married at the end of this garden party if mother has her way," or something along those lines. And Violet says, "Actually, I'm going to back off because Benedict told me that you need some rest." And Eloise, quite shocked, says, "Thank you." But then Violet says, "But since you're not going to see any suitors, you need to chaperone Hyacinth during her finishing lessons." Eloise says, "No," questionably. And Violet says, "Okay, well, you can go look for some suitors this afternoon." And then Eloise is like, "Okay, she'll stay." Then Hyacinth is like, you'll actually probably benefit from those lessons. She says, particularly posture lessons, while she's looking at a slumped over Eloise. And they all turn around and drink their tea. At the Featherington house, Portia and Philippa are having a conversation about the maid wars. Portia makes a comment where she says that none of the maids will leave because they're treated so well at Featherington house. And Farley, I believe, is who is the head of their household, the maid that they're kind of plotting and scheming with, or making her plot and scheme. She says, "Isn't that right, Varley?" And Varley says, "Actually, I would like to talk to you privately." And Portia says, "Well, we're all family." Varley tells Portia that she would like an increase in wage. Portia says she will consider it. Varley is very thrilled by that. And also, it's important to note that Varley is asking for an increase in wage because she does go above and beyond in that household. And she also received another offer from another household, a generous offer. And as out of her loyalty to Portia, she's asking for a wage increase first. So just know that. Back at the cottage, Benedict's cottage, Mrs. Crabtree is helping Sophie put on a dress. Mrs. Crabtree mentions a beautiful necklace that Sophie has, and she's asked if there's a story behind it. Sophie tells her no, and she's not accustomed to wearing necklines that low. After Mrs. Crabtree leaves, Sophie puts her necklace in the drawer at Benedict's cottage. And I don't know yet, but I feel like that's an important thing that we saw. So Sophie's necklace is in Benedict's drawer in the room that she's staying in. Just know that. So Sophie and Mrs. Crabtree go into Benedict's room where there is a generous, marvelous breakfast spread. Mr. Crabtree is in there. So Sophie goes to the table where the food is. They have a little, tray for Benedict, and he has his breakfast on it. So they start eating, and Mr. Crabtree and Mrs. Crabtree are just standing there. And Benedict kind of tells them, you don't have to stay. And Mrs. Crabtree says, "Yes, we will stay." Then Benedict says, "Okay, well, if you must stay, go ahead and sit." So Mr. and Mrs. Crabtree just sit down next to Sophie. Benedict tells Sophie that they have known the Crabtrees. They have been with them for 20 years. And then Mr. Crabtree says he doesn't visit enough. And Benedict kind of says that he has various affairs that are going on in London. And Sophie kind of gives him a look. And then he also tells Mr. Crabtree, "Can you go ahead and get the coach ready because we're going to go ahead and leave today?" Mrs. Crabtree is not having it. She says, "No, you don't. You need to rest because you have this injury. And if it gets infected, then what?" And Benedict says, "I assure you, I'm feeling better with every bite of food." And Mr. Crabtree says it's better not to argue. And reluctantly, Benedict agrees to stay. Sophie says that she will help Mrs. Crabtree around the house. Benedict says, "Absolutely not. You are my guest and you will be treated as such." And she's like, "What am I supposed to do?" And Benedict says, "Are you not used to leisure?" And Sophie says, "I'm used to leisure." And then they go back to eating. I want to note in this moment too, when they first start eating, Benedict notices how enthused Sophie is eating this food, and he mentions he's never seen someone eat or look at food or eat with so much enthusiasm. I do feel like that is a callback to the masquerade ball where, he first laid eyes on Sophie. He didn't know that was Sophie, but the lady in silver, and she was looking up at the chandelier, and that intrigued him, that she looked so interested and so intrigued by that chandelier. So I felt like this and this moment, the chandelier moment and this breakfast food, is kind of a callback to one another, or a callback to the chandelier moment. Later on, Sophie is wandering around the estate outside, and Benedict goes to his window and sees her, and he has a little smile on his face watching her wander around the estate. Queen Charlotte and Agatha are having a conversation about Lady Whistledown. Queen Charlotte is annoyed that Lady Whistledown is talking about the maid wars, and she says she needs to be talking about gossip. Agatha says, "This is gossip. That is what everyone is talking about these maid wars. It has left the town in disarray, and it is wreaking havoc on the town." Queen Charlotte says they don't have any maids. And then she asks Brimsley, and Brimsley says, very ever so swiftly, they have 142 maids and coachmen, or the male staff. So 142. And Queen Charlotte asks about Agatha's maids, and Agatha says, oh, I pay them very well and I treat them with respect. And then Queen Charlotte asks Brimsley how they're treating him, and Brimsley says, along the lines, he doesn't really answer the question, but he says that, you know, they are royalty, so maids are trying to come in, not leave. Then Agatha says, who would be trying to leave? Sarcastically, and I'm sure that's a dig to Queen Charlotte, because Lady Danbury is trying to get up out of society. She's trying to leave this town and she won't let her. And then Queen Charlotte, I guess, just doesn't really think about that comment or just ignores it. She says, what are they going to do today? And Agatha says, whatever Her Majesty wants. And they decide to watch a rope dancer, I believe. Yes, that's what I have in my notes, a rope dancer. Francesca and Lord Kilmartin are having a conversation, and Francesca's concerned that they are not pregnant yet, and Lord Kilmartin assures her, well, we've barely been married a year and we've just recently reconciled. And by that, I mean, I think that he probably was traveling, and so now they're back together. However, Francesca is still concerned. Francesca asks if she's doing anything wrong. Lord Kilmartin has heard that if you reach the pinnacle, most ladies are able to conceive. And Lord Kilmartin says, you are reaching your pinnacle, correct? And Francesca's like, yeah. Not like that, but when she turns over, this girl ain't never had a pinnacle in her life. And I think you can deduce what a pinnacle means. I'm gonna keep it cute, since we are back in olden days and they called it pinnacle, but y'all know what that means. Sophie runs into Benedict at the library in his cottage, and they start having discussions in the library. Sophie stumbles upon his artwork, and she mentions the intention behind it. And Benedict says, yeah, that was, you know, the intention behind the painting. Sophie asks him if he's a painter or an artist, and he says he was dibbling and dabbling in it. They even start to talk about Michelangelo. Benedict is intrigued that Sophie, being a maid, knows so much about Michelangelo, and asks what family she works in for her to know about Michelangelo. And she doesn't really want to talk about it. And she says, I'm going to go to my room. So as she's walking back to her room, she grabs a book, and Benedict says, oh, Sophie, that's my French grammar lesson. And Sophie surprises Benedict, and she starts speaking French. Okay. And so Benedict starts speaking French back to her, and she starts kind of giggling and laughing. And he was like, my pronunciation was great. And she kind of walks up to him and says, you need to work on your lips. And he's like, my lips. And he starts talking in French, like with his lips. And then he looks at her lips, and they look like they're about to kiss, but they don't, because Mr. Crabtree interrupts them. Mr. Crabtree tells Benedict that Mrs. Crabtree is on her way to Benedict's room because she's giving him his dinner. And if she sees him outside of his room, she will lose it because he's supposed to be on bed rest. And Benedict says, okay. I do want to point out on this note, this was kind of funny because Sophie is talking about Benedict's French. And just a side note, I know this particular actor. So this particular actor, Luke Thompson, Benedict, he is English, I believe. However, he moved to France when he was younger, a child. So I believe he speaks French fluently. So I'm pretty sure his pronunciation is probably A+++, but just thought that was a funny moment. Back at the Featherington house, Portia calls back at the Featherington house, Portia calls Varley and tells her that she has a surprise for her. And she's like, a surprise? And there's this big box there. And Portia, tells her to open it. Varley opens the box, and it is a bunch of Portia's dresses. Portia tells Varley that they cannot afford to give her a raise, but knows that she does do a lot of hard work, so this is her gift to her. A bunch of Portia's dresses. Y'all know how them Featheringtons dress. They're not the best. Kind of very obnoxious colors, very loud colors. And also, Varley is a maid. Where is this lady gonna wear these clothes? Like, just completely tone deaf. Tone deaf to the whole thing. However, Varley being a sweet person, she thanks her. And Portia says, "Oh, I'm so exhausted from cleaning out the back of my wardrobe. I need a cup of tea. Varley, can you get the tea?" And Varley says, "Yes, ma'am," and picks up the big heavy box. And she's struggling, but she's walking back, about to go get Portia's tea. We cut to another Penelope and Colin carriage scene. So I guess that's their thing, doing it in a carriage. Okay, like we saw that in season 3. I do not care to see it. Excuse me, I do not care to see it this season. When I tell y'all, I'm so tired of Colin and Penelope. Oh, I cannot see. I hate how they have ruined the 3rd season for me. Because again, like I said in my first video, I loved me some Penelope and Colin. I was looking forward to them after, they come second to Kate and Anthony. But I do not care to see Colin and Penelope doing all, like, I don't care. We saw it last season. Next. Anyway, we walk in, or we are seeing them in a carriage scene on their way to go meet Francesca and Kilmartin. Colin and Penelope look a little flustered while they're meeting Kilmartin and Francesca. Kilmartin and Colin go in to get the ice cream. Francesca and Penelope are alone. And Penelope tells Francesca, "Is it awful how obvious we look?" While Francesca is patting down Penelope in her hair. And then Penelope says, "Of course you know, because you two are both newlyweds." And Penelope's like, Francesca's like, what am I supposed to know as a newlywed? But Kilmartin and Colin come back and interrupt them. Agatha is walking with Lady Mondrick. Agatha tells Lady Mondrick that Queen Charlotte likes to keep her close. Agatha then says that she spends all her afternoons with Queen Charlotte, which it's pleasant, but she spends a lot of time with her. And Lady Mondrick says, "As if you're the only lady in waiting." And Agatha also mentions that Queen Charlotte is her friend. But after Lady Mondrick had made the comment about Queen Charlotte act like Agatha is the only lady in waiting, Agatha gives her a look. And she says, "It is an honor to be a lady in waiting." And Lady Mondrick wasn't trying to offend. She says, "Right, but if you're the only one she sees as a friend, what about the other ladies in waiting? They're not going to be able to fill your shoes." And Agatha liked that answer, and she's like, And then they just keep walking. Sophie is washing dishes in the kitchen, and Mrs. Crabtree tells her to stop it. Sophie's like, "I'm almost done," but she tells her to stop. And she says, "Go sit in that comfortable chair." Mrs. Crabtree tells her, "You're not used to leisure time, are you?" Sophie asks if there is a mail coach she can get on or ride in to the next village so she can find employment. Mrs. Crabtree tells her, "Benedict said that he'll find you a job and he is a man of his word." Sophie says, "Well, I'm suppose he'll use his charm." And Sophie says, "I'm sure he'll use his charm as he can be very compelling." And Mrs. Crabtree says, "Has he been inappropriate with you?" And Sophie says, "No, actually he's been quite the opposite of that." And Mrs. Crabtree says that he can be very charming and you might take it the wrong way. But just remember remember your position. And kind of just puts her in check a little bit. When I first saw this, I thought it was a little harsh, but then we'll understand why in a little bit. At the garden party, Violet is talking to the host of the party, and they are talking about the maid wars. And then she leaves her as she sees Lord Anderson behind her. Lord Anderson asks Violet when they can spend time together alone. And Violet says, "Well, it's been quite some time." And you can tell she's a little flustered. And Lord Anderson says, "Would you like me to change the subject?" And she says, "Yes, please." And then they walk off together arm in arm. Lady Penwood arrives with her daughters, and everyone is talking about her because Lady Penwood has stolen a lot of these family staff. She also goes up to the host to the party and says, thank you for inviting her. And she's like, well, I sent you the invitation after, or excuse me, I sent you the invitation before you stole my coachman. And Lady Penwood says, and isn't he wonderful? And the host's mouth just drops as Lady Penwood and the two daughters, Rosamund and Posy, walk with her. So I also want to note that Lady Penwood wears black all the time. She is wearing a black dress. I don't know if there is a certain period where they have to wear these things or not, but I don't know if that's a reference to Black Widow. She's a Black Widow. I don't know. Anyway, I have noticed that she's always wearing black, and I don't know what the meaning of that is. And I don't know if they're going to get into that in the second half of the series, but just know she's always wearing a black dress. Back at Benedict's cottage, Sophie is in the drawing room and Benedict comes in, waltzing in, and Sophie tells him that he is supposed to be resting, and he says he's bored out of his mind and he's just looking for something he can take. Benedict says she cannot condemn him, but she must keep his secret. And if she's so curious, she can come outside with him. They go outside to fly the kite. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but they did talk about this kite and how Benedict earlier when they were in the I think the room where Sophie discovered his art, Benedict had said that the kite that was there, he needed to fix up for Gregory, but he never got around to it. So now he goes outside and he wants to fly this kite that he was supposed to fix for Gregory. He's struggling to fly the kite, and Sophie is like, you need to do XYZ. And he's like, I know how to fly a kite, and I've humiliated myself with you enough. Just give me a moment, as it's been a while. And so he finally is able to fly the kite. It goes into the air, and he said he forgot how fun it was to fly the kite. Sophie says it reminds her so much of childhood memories, and sensing Sophie's excitement, he says that she must fly the kite, and she refuses at first, but then he tells her that he insists that she does it. And then she starts flying the kite, and she's running around having looks like the time of her life. Meanwhile, Mrs. Crabtree is seeing what's going on. She's in the kitchen with Mr. Crabtree, and she tells Mr. Crabtree, do you see what's happening? And Mr. Crabtree sarcastically says, I'm sure there's a kite at the end of that string. And she's like, yeah, but I mean, do you see what's happening between Sophie and Benedict? And Mr. Crabtree says he looks like her maid. And she's like, she's more than a maid to him. And he says, well, he probably likes her. She says, no, he can't like her. He can't defile her. Do you know what will happen if they find out that a man defiled the maid? The man of the house defiles the maid. And Mr. Crabtree says, who is talking about defiling? And Mrs. Crabtree just goes on this tangent where she says, it will ruin her reputation. She'll never, ever be able to get a job with any family because the lady of the house won't like that in her home. So we cut back to Eloise at Bridgerton House with Hyacinth, who is chaperoning her with her lessons. You can tell that Hyacinth is very excited to learn about her finishing lessons, and she's answering all the questions right, while Eloise is just there chaperoning. This scene's not really that important, but I just wanted to kind of touch on how Hyacinth is like the antithesis of Eloise. Hyacinth is like, make me a wife, I'm ready. And Eloise is like, no thanks. Back at the cottage, Benedict's cottage, Sophie is walking around the estate again, walking outdoors, and she stumbles upon a skinny dipping Benedict. So Benedict's in the lake, skinny dipping, and Benedict senses that there's somebody there. So Benedict comes out of the water, puts his pants on, and he insists that that person shows themselves, and it is Sophie. Benedict asks what she's doing there, and she says she's taking her daily walk. Benedict says it's convenient that she ends up at the lake where he's taking a swim. So, again, now this could be just me looking too much into stuff, but I do think there's something to be said when someone is a soulmate and coincidences keep happening, that's meaning something. And I feel like that is in the dialogue for a reason, that it's just convenient that, they just happened to meet up at the lake. There is another instance. I guess we definitely can say the Cavender house for sure. The Cavender, him ending up at Cavender house, and Sophie worked there. What are the odds, right? So it is the universe telling them that there's something there. But anyway, that could be just me. Benedict, where I think he's kind of teasing Sophie, he says he wouldn't be offended if she followed him there. And she says, I didn't follow you here to the lake. Mr. Crabtree told me about it, and I'm very good with directions. Benedict, she's very good with, she's very good with directions and listening skills. Benedict says, just because you have a thorough answer doesn't mean it's a good one. Ooh. And then she says, you shouldn't be in the water because the water is freezing. And he's like, it's temperate. She says she shouldn't be there. She says he shouldn't be there because of his room. He says, and I quote, if we are concerned with shoulds, you should not be spying. And Sophie insists again that she is not spying on him. So they go back and forth for a minute where he's just basically kind of saying, you've been spying on me. She's like, no, I'm not. And they're doing this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for a minute. Then Benedict says, so you don't notice me? And she says, of course I notice you. And as they were doing the back and forth, they're getting closer and closer. So when Sophie admits that she notices him, they're like this close together. So then they kiss after that moment. And they are both flustered and they apologize to one another. And Sophie says, or excuse me, they start walking, but then they're walking in tandem side by side. And then Sophie says she's going to finish her walk. And Benedict says, indeed. And then they kind of go their separate ways. Now, I want to just pause for a moment here and say that when Sophie and Benedict were doing the back and forth thing, you're spying on me. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. And they're getting closer and closer, and then they kiss. Woo! I was getting Kate and Anthony vibes, y'all, when that happened. And I loved every second of that. I was eating it up because these two do have like a banter. It's not as visceral as Kate and Anthony's was because, with Kate and Anthony, there was a lot of venom. I don't want to say venom because it's more negative, but there was a lot of passion between those two because, Kate seemed like a very feminist and Anthony was always putting his foot in his mouth when it came to her because she was always checking him. With these two, I think it's a little bit more friendlier, but they still have the back and forth and the banter going, and I think it's cute. So I do like this between these two. But anyway, after this, Sophie walks into, I guess she's finishing her walk. She walks into the cottage of Mrs. Crabtree is kind of disgusting, and she says, good day, Mrs. Crabtree. And she says, good day, Sophie. And Sophie walks, I guess, to her room. Shortly afterwards, Benedict walks in right after her, and he says, a sublime day in the countryside, isn't it, Mrs. Crabtree? And he's just in a jovial mood, and Mrs. Crabtree's like, it is. And she's looking at these two like, something done went down. And then it cuts to Sophie in her room, asking her up against the door. She's asking herself, what is she doing? So later that night, Mrs. Crabtree is tending to Benedict's wounds, and his wounds are healing nicely. And while she's like, putting stuff on his wound, Benedict says, yes, Mrs. Crabtree. And she says, I tried to keep my mouth shut. And he said, you shouldn't, as you were like a second mother and you can't hold your opinion either. Mrs. Crabtree says, you bring a maid to the house and you don't treat her as one. Benedict says, after all that Sophie went through the previous night or the night at Cavender's house, he must treat her as our guest. And Mrs. Crabtree asks, is that all that she is to you? And Benedict says that they are just friends. So Mrs. Crabtree drops some knowledge on Benedict and says that you may see her as a friend, but she has no choice in the matter. And she explains that because you treat her as a friend, she has to just abide by that because of his position. And you need to think about that. She tells him that he needs to find a nice young lady in London, and he says that he did, but he can't find her. Mrs. Crabtree says, well, if you do find her, please make sure you don't treat her like one of your projects where you're passionate about it one day and then you forget about it the next. You deserve more. You deserve to dedicate yourself to something. That's what she said. And then she leaves. Now, I do want to, again, I mentioned earlier how when Mrs. Crabtree was having a conversation with Sophie that she needs to basically know her place. And she basically kind of had the same conversation with Benedict. And so I believe, when she's having that conversation with Mr. Crabtree in the kitchen, that she is actually trying to protect Sophie because Benedict getting involved with Sophie will ruin Sophie's reputation more so than Benedict. Sophie has a lot to lose because she literally has nothing but her job. So, yeah. So, nice little gems that Mrs. Crabtree's been dropping. At Featherington House, Portia comes in a new dress, and Mrs. Varley comments on how nice it is. And Miss Featherington says, since I gave you my dresses, I had to get more. And Varley looks like outside the drawing room and sees all the staff coming in with boxes and boxes of clothing for Portia. And Mrs. Varley said, I thought the money was scarce. Portia says, Varley, it's unseemly to talk about money with family. And Varley says, we are not family. I'm your employee. Okay. So Varley says she loves her and her daughters, but she has done so much for this family and has kept their secrets. She's done a lot. Varley says that she has done so much for this family, and including keeping all of their secrets, but she's not a part of their family. And she has received a generous offer from another family. And Portia says, okay, well, if you want to leave, leave. And Varley is shocked at first, but then Varley says she's going to leave, and she ends up leaving. And Portia does look shocked that Varley decided to leave. Back at the castle, Charlotte, Queen Charlotte, and Danbury, Lady Danbury, are discussing bonbons. Danbury asks if Queen Charlotte has replaced her lady-in-waiting, Lady Beth. This is the one that was pregnant from episode 2, I believe. She is pregnant. She's left. So Agatha's asking if she's replaced her. And Queen Charlotte's like, we are discussing bonbons. And she says she'll have to talk to the secretary about it. Agatha asks if she can actually pick her next lady in waiting. And Queen Charlotte says, how do you know what I need? Lady Danbury asks if she can pick her next lady in waiting because she knows what Queen Charlotte needs. And Queen Charlotte says, I don't need any of them. Queen Charlotte says she doesn't need any of them because they are dull. Agatha assures her she will find her one. And Queen Charlotte says, go ahead, but you're going to fail. And then Agatha accepts the challenge, and Brimsley kind of has a worried look on his face. Back in the library at the cottage, Sophie runs into Benedict in the library, and it does look like Benedict is drawing a lady, and the lady in silver from the Masquerade Ball. I'm not sure because the back was turned, so I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's probably who he was drawing. Benedict tells Sophie that he has been cleared by Mrs. Crabtree. And Sophie says that's wonderful because she wants to get back to London so she can find a job. And Benedict says, that's funny because I was thinking the same thing. Then Benedict apologizes for the kiss and says that he regrets it, which I'm pretty sure is like a gut punch to Sophie. But she says, don't mention it and I will never speak of it again. She walks out after that, and you can tell that Benedict regrets telling her that. But, after the conversation that she had with that he had with Mrs. Crabtree, quite frankly, what both of them had with Mrs. Crabtree, they're probably both feeling the type of way that it's wrong. This chemistry, this connection that they feel towards one another. Violet goes to Lord Anderson's home and tells him that she does want to be with him. She's kind of, in this scene, she's kind of mentioning all the insecurities that she has, that she's only been with Edwin, her husband who's passed away, and that she's had 8 children and she looks different and she hasn't done this and she doesn't know how it's going to feel to be alone with him. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be different, but she's just kind of rambling. And Lord Anderson reaches for her hand and she puts her hand in his. And Lord Anderson tells her that everything will be fine. He is just grateful to have her and he's grateful just to be in her orbit. And then they share a kiss. And I want you to know that they are playing All I Wanted by Paramore in this moment. And I heart Paramore. Paramore is probably one of my top 5 of all time's favorite bands of all time, of mine. So I just love that they were playing All I Wanted. Yay. So the closing scene is Sophie and Benedict in the coach on their way back to London, and they look very somber. Sophie's looking at the cottage because she just loved it, and it was like a little piece of paradise for them. I felt like they could just be, and they just were alone, and it was nice. But now they are going back to real life. And Lady Whistledown, as she's narrating, because you know she always narrates the closing of the episode, says that things always go back to the way they are. And that's probably a foreshadowing that things are about to go back to the way they were. So that was the end of the episode. That was episode 3. Yay. I really liked this episode. It was very sweet. Benedict and Sophie remind me a little bit of Kate and Anthony, and I love it. I love their back and forth, their banter, they're cute. Yeah, so I like that. Francesca and Kilmartin, that's a cute little backstory. Yeah, but you know, yeah, but yeah. But anyway, that's the end of the episode. Please like, share, subscribe to my channel, comment, leave a comment, tell me how you feel about Bridgerton so far. Please no spoilers for those who have not watched other episodes, but yeah. So the next episode I'll be talking about, obviously, is episode 4. I'm gonna try to record that one tomorrow because I am eager to get to the second half of this show. So I think I'll probably record episode 4 tomorrow. So I'll probably get that out pretty quickly. But yeah, so I will see y'all next time for episode 4. Thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you next time. Bye.